This past Sunday, I posted a video about the New York Times blaming evangelical Christians for the spread of coronavirus in the U.S. According to the New York Times, evangelical Christians are super anti-science and they support President Donald Trump, which causes him to have an anti-science stance towards coronavirus. So, last Sunday's lesson from the media was that when there's a global pandemic and people around the world are dying, always be sure to attack Christians. Any stick is good enough to hit a Christian. Today's lesson comes from Newsweek. We know which religion to attack during a pandemic. Any idea which religion the media should promote during a pandemic? You guessed it, Islam. If people are dying from a contagious disease, make sure you use their deaths to promote Islam. Just stand on top of the giant pile of dead bodies so you can shout to the world that we all need to listen to Muhammad. Prophet Muhammad. Show us how it's done, Newsweek. Can the power of prayer alone stop a pandemic like the coronavirus? Asked no one ever. Even the Prophet Muhammad thought otherwise. The Prophet Muhammad? Please, tell us more, failed News Magazine, now just a website. The COVID-19 pandemic is forcing governments and news sources to provide the most accurate and helpful advice to the world's population, as the disease is indeed global in reach. Healthcare professionals are in high demand, and so too are scientists who study the transmission and effect of pandemics. Experts like immunologist Dr. Anthony Fauci and medical reporter Dr. Sanjay Gupta are saying that good hygiene and quarantining, or the practice of isolating from others in the hope of preventing the spread of contagious diseases, are the most effective tools to contain COVID-19. Do you know who else suggested good hygiene and quarantining during a pandemic? Who? Who could it be? Come on, tell us. Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, over 1,300 years ago. While he is by no means a traditional expert on matters of deadly diseases, though he is the world's leading authority on marrying prepubescent girls, am I right? Muhammad nonetheless had sound advice to prevent and combat a development like COVID-19. Before we even look at Muhammad's amazing advice for preventing and combating coronavirus, just try to grasp the absurdity of this article. We have doctors, nurses, health agencies, immunologists, biostatisticians, but Newsweek is telling us that what we really need to do is seek advice from an illiterate 7th century Arabian caravan robber. I am looking forward to this. Muhammad said, if you hear of an outbreak of plague in a land, do not enter it. But if the plague outbreaks out? Newsweek can't even afford editors now? What a garbage site. But if the plague outbreaks out in a place while you are in it, do not leave that place. Hey, that's a coincidence. I already made a video about this quotation. As we saw in that video, link is in the description box, when we read the quotation in context, Muhammad wasn't saying anything about people being quarantined because of a contagious disease. Muhammad didn't believe in contagious diseases. Instead, Muhammad claimed that Allah sometimes punishes an entire nation with plague. If you're a Muslim and you're part of a nation that Allah is punishing with plague, don't try to run, because running would mean that you're trying to escape Allah's punishment. If you're a Muslim and you're not part of the nation that Allah is punishing with plague, don't go to that nation, because you'd be entering a nation knowing that Allah is punishing it. Muhammad's command, which was only for Muslims, had nothing to do with Muhammad being worried about Muslims spreading a disease. Muhammad was worried about Muslims thinking that they could outsmart Allah and escape his judgment. Strange that Newsweek leaves all of this out and pretends that Muhammad was advocating medical quarantines. He also said those with contagious diseases should be kept away from those who are healthy. You dirty, dirty little liars. There are some Muslim sources that claim that Muhammad told his followers not to bring the sick near the healthy, But those same passages say that there's no such thing as contagious diseases. So it's just deceptive to replace those who are sick with those with contagious diseases, and then to leave out the part where Muhammad says that there's no such thing as a contagious disease. But you'll recall that I made a video about this quotation too. In that video, link is in the description box, we read lots of passages like Sahih Muslim 55:21. Abu Huraira reported Allah's Messenger as saying, "There is no transitive disease, no divination, but I like good words." As we saw in my previous video, by transitive disease, Muhammad means a disease that is transmitted from one person to another. That would include what we call contagious diseases. And we read many more passages where Muhammad claims that there's no such thing as a contagious disease. Now, I stuck to passages from Sahih Muslim in that video. Let me give you two passages from Jami' at-Tirmidhi to confirm what I'm saying. Jami' at-Tirmidhi, 21:43. Ibn Mas'ud narrated, "The Messenger of Allah stood among us and said, 'One thing does not infect another.' So a Bedouin said, 'O Messenger of Allah, if a camel gets mangy glands and we leave it at the resting place of camels, then all of the camels get mange.' The Messenger of Allah said, 'Who caused the first to get mange? There is no adwa nor safar. Allah created every soul, so He wrote its life, its provision, and its afflictions.'" Notice Muhammad clearly states one thing does not infect another. A random Bedouin, who clearly knows more about the spread of disease than Muhammad, asks him, "Well, how come healthy camels get mange when we put them beside a sick camel that has mange? Doesn't that suggest that the healthy animals are catching the disease from the sick animal?" Look at Muhammad's response. Well, who caused the first to get mange? In other words, the first camel that got mange obviously didn't get it from another camel that got mange. Therefore, camels get the disease spontaneously, which somehow means that no camel gets mange from another camel. Muhammad goes on to say, there is no adwa. As we're about to see, adwa refers to a disease that spreads from one person or animal to another. Now, if there is no contagious disease, why do people and animals get sick? Allah created every soul, so He wrote its life, its provision, and its afflictions. This is sheer fatalism. If you get a disease, it has nothing to do with you coming into contact with someone who's already infected. You were just destined to get the disease. Allah decreed it. Is this good medical advice? Let's read one more hadith on this issue. Jami' at-Tirmidhi, 16:15. Anas narrated that the Messenger of Allah said, "There is no adwa and no tiara, and I like fa'l." They said, "O Messenger of Allah, what is fa'l?" He said, "A good statement." So, there is no adwa, but we have some commentary explaining what this means. Adwa, transference of disease from the affected person to others. Remember, Muhammad said that there is no adwa. What is adwa? Transference of disease from the affected person to others. This narration makes it clear that disease does not pass on to another person by itself, but goes to another person by the will of Allah. As the first person gets some disease with the will of Allah, the same way the second and the third and so on get this disease by the will of Allah. A person who gets sick and thinks that he got this disease from another person shows lack of trust in Allah. He is advised instead to visit the patients and safeguard his faith and trust in Allah. Notice this last part. Visit the patients. Visit people who have a disease and safeguard your faith and trust in Allah. Did Muhammad believe in contagious diseases? Not a bit. If a bunch of people catch a disease at the same time, it's because Allah independently destined all of them to get the disease. And yet Newsweek assures readers that Muhammad said those with contagious diseases should be kept away from those who are healthy. Sorry, Muhammad said no such thing, because there's no such thing as contagious diseases, according to Muhammad. But Muslim sources do tell us that Muhammad said something that looks close to this. Don't bring the sick to the healthy. What did he mean by don't bring the sick to the healthy? Well, there are a few possibilities here. First, his followers could have made up that quotation because they knew that their prophet was wrong. The reason I'm bringing up this possibility is that in the hadith where Muhammad says, don't bring the sick to the healthy, other Muslims catch Abu Huraira lying about what Muhammad said because he knew Muhammad was wrong. And Abu Huraira is the one reporting that Muhammad said, don't bring the sick to the healthy. Abu Huraira was already lying, so he may have been lying about this as well. Second, when Muhammad said that there's no such thing as a contagious disease, people who knew more than he did would start asking him, then why do my healthy camels get sick when they're around a sick camel? It's possible that over time they wore him down and that he reluctantly agreed that sick animals shouldn't be around healthy animals, in which case this wisdom came from Bedouins, not from Muhammad. Finally, if we interpret this in light of what Muhammad said about not fleeing an area that Allah is punishing with plague, Muhammad could have meant something similar here. Muhammad could be saying, if Allah is punishing those camels with mange, don't bring healthy camels around them because Allah might end up punishing them too. Whatever Muhammad meant, if he even said this, he still didn't believe in contagious diseases, and as a rule, if a man doesn't believe in contagious diseases, we shouldn't be going to him for advice about contagious diseases. Moving on. Muhammad also strongly encouraged human beings to adhere to hygienic practices that would keep people safe from infection. Consider the following hadiths, or sayings, of Prophet Muhammad. Cleanliness is part of faith. Wash your hands after you wake up. You do not know where your hands have moved while you sleep. The blessings of food lie in washing hands before and after eating. Well, assuming lots of people today don't know that they should wash their hands, it's good that we have a prophet to explain this. But as usual, there's a problem. We wash with soap and clean water. What would Muhammad and his companions wash with? Sunan Abu Dawud 66. Abu Sa'id al-Khudri narrated that the Messenger of Allah was asked, should we perform the wudu, this is the word for Muslim washings, from the well of Buddha, while it is a well that menstruation rags and dog carcasses and filth, meaning human waste, are thrown in? The Messenger of Allah replied, water is pure, and nothing impurifies it. Muhammad himself used the water from this well, as we read in Sunan Abu Dawud 67. Abu Sa'id al-Khudri narrated that he heard someone say to the Messenger of Allah, water is drawn out for you from the well of Buddha, while it is a well in which dog carcasses, menstruation rags, and filth are thrown. So the Messenger of Allah replied, indeed, water is pure, and nothing impurifies it. Muhammad and his companions would wash their faces and their mouths and their nostrils with water from a well that had used menstrual rags, dead dogs, and human urine and feces floating in it. Should we be taking advice from Muhammad about cleanliness? I have a separate video titled The Top 5 Most Disgusting Facts About Prophet Muhammad. The link is in the description box. Needless to say, the cleanliness problem gets much, much worse. Muhammad told his followers to suck on each other's fingers. Muhammad would suck on the tongues of little boys. Muhammad would have sex with all 9 or 11 of his wives in one night, but only take one bath. And worst of all, Muhammad was constantly covered in semen. If you don't believe me, you haven't been following this channel for very long. Do yourself a favor and check out that video, and you tell me whether Muhammad's advice can really help us stop the spread of coronavirus. The article continues. And what if someone does fall ill? What kind of advice would Muhammad provide to his fellow human beings who are suffering from pain? He would encourage people to always seek medical treatment and medication. Make use of medical treatment, he said, for God has not made a disease without appointing a remedy for it, with the exception of one disease, old age. So, for every disease Allah makes, He also makes the cure. We just have to find it. But where do we find the cure for a disease? Fortunately, Prophet Muhammad, MD, tells us. Sahih al-Bukhari, 3320. Narrated Abu Huraira, the Prophet said, if a housefly falls in the drink of any one of you, he should dip it in the drink. For one of its wings has a disease, and the other has the cure for the disease. Sunan Abu Dawud, 3844. It was narrated that Abu Huraira said, the Messenger of Allah said, if a fly falls into the vessel of one of you, then immerse it. For on one of its wings is a disease, and on the other is a cure. When it falls onto the wing on which is a disease, so immerse it fully. Clearly, if you can find a fly with coronavirus on one of its wings, the cure for the disease will be on the other wing. Pandemic over. But what if we want another cure? Well, Muhammad's got a backup plan. Sahih Muslim, 5768. It was narrated from Abu Huraira that the Messenger of Allah said, there is no disease, but there is a cure for it in the black seed, except death. Jami at-Tirmidhi, 2041. Abu Huraira narrated that the Prophet said, use this black seed, for indeed it contains a cure for every disease except Asam, and Asam is death. Where do we find the cure for coronavirus and cancer and AIDS? It's been right here all along. You can order these seeds on Amazon.com and they cure every disease except death. Why are doctors acting like they can't find cures to all these diseases when Muhammad found the cure for all diseases except death nearly 14 centuries ago? Sounds like a conspiracy against Islam. Maybe Newsweek should post an article about this anti-Islam conspiracy. But this conspiracy just can't stop Muhammad because he is an unstoppable fire hose of good ideas. If you can't find a fly with coronavirus and you can't get any black seed and you end up catching coronavirus, Muhammad knows how to make you feel better right before he dismembers you and burns out your eyes. Sunan an-Nasai, number 307. It was narrated from Anas bin Malik that some Bedouins from Urana came to the Prophet and became Muslim, but the climate of Al-Medina did not suit them. Their skin turned yellow and their stomachs became swollen. The Messenger of Allah sent them to some pregnant camels of his and told them to drink their milk and urine until they recovered. Then they killed the camel herder and drove the camels away. The Messenger of Allah sent people after them, and they were brought back. Their hands and their feet were cut off, and their eyes were smoldered with burning nails. The commander of the believers, Abdul Malik, said to Anas when he was narrating this hadith to him, were they being punished for kufr or for a sin? He said, for kufr. Kufr means unbelief. So, were they tortured and killed because they killed the camel herder and drove Muhammad's camels away? Or were they tortured and killed because they left Islam? And they were tortured and killed for leaving Islam. So, fly wings, black seed, and camel urine. That's Muhammad's miracle magic cure-all for the coronavirus and all other diseases except death. Why didn't Newsweek include these amazing medical insights? Probably because if they did, everyone would conclude that Muhammad was a moron and that his medical speculations are less than useless. Let's finish this. Perhaps most importantly, he knew when to balance faith with reason. In recent weeks, some have gone so far as to suggest that prayer would be better at keeping you from the coronavirus than adhering to basic rules of social distancing and quarantine. How would Prophet Muhammad respond to the idea of prayer as the chief or only form of medicine? Consider the following story related to us by 9th century Persian scholar Al-Tirmidhi. One day, Prophet Muhammad noticed a Bedouin man leaving his camel without tying it. He asked the Bedouin, "Why don't you tie down your camel?" The Bedouin answered, "I put my trust in God." The Prophet then said, "Tie your camel first, then put your trust in God." Muhammad encouraged people to seek guidance in their religion, but he hoped they take basic precautionary measures for the stability, safety, and well-being of all. In other words, he hoped people would use their common sense. There you have it, Muhammad's brilliant medical advice. He told one of his followers to tie down his camel. It's a medical miracle. Tie down your camel. Muhammad solved coronavirus. Do you see how low the media sets the bar when it comes to Islam? Tie down your camel is so important that it deserves an article in Newsweek in the middle of a pandemic. Would Newsweek publish an article about anyone else saying something so unbelievably obvious? Lock your doors at night, ladies and gentlemen. Oh my goodness, I must be a prophet. I told people to lock their doors at night. Tie down your camel. We need Muhammad for that advice. What would happen if we actually followed Muhammad's advice? Well, after having sex with all our wives in a single night, we'd take a single bath in a giant vat of used menstrual rags, dead dogs, and human waste. Then we'd suck on the fingers of grown men and the tongues of little boys. We'd dunk disease-carrying flies in our food and walk around inexplicably covered in semen. And when we inevitably got sick, we'd eat a bunch of black seed and wash it down with a nice tall glass of camelade, aka camel urine. And we would die. Newsweek tells us that we need to seek medical advice from a man whose advice would get us all killed if we were stupid enough to follow it. Why does Newsweek post this garbage? Because modern media outlets are run by weak-willed half-wits who wouldn't know actual journalism if it smacked them in their mouths because they're too busy chasing the praise of woke leftist college students on Twitter. These media outlets are dying for a reason. They have no heart, and no spine, and absolutely no testicles. They're like jellyfish that have washed up on some barren shore, hoping that a social justice warrior will see them, have mercy on them, and toss them back into the water with a retweet. The only difference is that jellyfish do have testicles. Pretty pathetic when our journalists are less complex creatures than jellyfish.